Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
A Suspicion of Spies, Risks, Secrets and Shadows, the biography of Wilfred Biffy Dunderdale, is a new book out about a secret agent who basically was in the served his country for 40 years, but very few people have heard of him. One person who has heard of him is the author of the book, Lieutenant Colonel Tim Spicer, OBE, who has served everywhere from the Far East, Cyprus, Germany, and has worked with the Special Forces and the Secret Forces. Delighted to say that Tim joins me live on the line now. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. Good
to have you with us. This is a tale that, and I put my hand up. I am that worst sort of creature, an armchair historian. This is a gentleman that I haven't come across, and the story begins in post-imperial Russia. Did you just explain a little bit about who Biffy was then?
Yeah, Biffy was he was a son of Richard Dunderdale, who in the sort of early part of the 20th century moved to Odessa in what's now Ukraine.
Yeah,
and he he was an entrepreneur, and he sold. I mean, did all sorts of things. He ran shipping. He was a trader, and he was clearly of use to the embryonic British Secret Service. And Biffy was his son. He was brought up in Odessa, multilingual. And Odessa was a sort of quite an interesting city in its time, a port city, quite tough, very entrepreneurial. People lived there. It was a hodgepodge of Europeans. And Biffy went to school there, but he was entrusted by his father at a very early age with things that you wouldn't expect a 16 or a 17-year-old to do, including transporting submarines in kit form from Vladivostok to St. Petersburg, which Biffy did, and thereby hangs the tale.
Right. So, I mean, when you say in kit form, I mean, presumably this is quite a large undertaking, submarines in kit form. I mean, you just weld a few bits together and off you go. Or presumably it gave a working knowledge of submarines, and this was to prove important, one of his first sort of escapades.
Yeah, the kit form is, I mean, it's not like a sort of Airfix model, but it had to be transshipped across the Pacific from Vancouver in Canada. And it was a sort of dodge, really, because the Americans wanted to sell these submarines to the Russian Imperial Navy, but there was an export ban for some reason. And so they were shipped to Canada, put in kit form, sent to Vladivostok. And Biffy helped transport them across Russia. He got to St. Petersburg, helped put them together, overseeing the dockyard people putting them together. And he thought, actually, I think I better take one of these out for a test run.
As you do at 16/17.
As you do, exactly. And which he did. And during the course of this test run, and they had torpedoes on board, he came across 5 German armed trawlers. Bear in mind that First World War, Germany, Imperial Russia at war with each other. And he sank them, one after the other.
Right.
He eventually got back. They got stuck in an anti-submarine net. It was quite an adventure. And the Tsar got to hear of this, Tsar Nicholas, and said, well, I really want to give this young man a decoration, a sort of military award. And the award that he homed in on was a cross between a gallantry award and a knighthood for this young chap. And the courtiers said, well, you can't give him that because in order to qualify for it, you've got to have a previous award. So, you're stepping up.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I don't care, give him both, which he did. So by the time he was 18, 19, he had these 2 medals. He was then recruited by British naval intelligence because at this point, the Russian Revolution had taken place and Russia was engaged in a civil war, Bolsheviks against White Russians.
Yeah.
And the British government decided to support the White Russians and sent a sort of expeditionary force to the Crimea, including some naval ships. And Biffy was taken on as an interpreter because he was multilingual, so bilingual in Russian and English. And that's how he got started, really. having already sunk these German boats.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I'm just amazed that, you on your CV at 18, you can say, well, I've got one of the highest medals in Russia. And it's just the thought that his father lets him take out submarines for a test run. I mean, I still have trouble getting the car keys off my father, even though, I'm in my late 50s, but there you go. So presumably for the fledgling secret services are looking for young men who are a little bit different, who are multilingual, who know the lay of the land. Of course, what's happening in Russia is going to basically define the map of Europe for the next 70 years at least, and they need somebody who can speak Russian and can keep the Bolsheviks at bay at that point. So when he's first approached, is this sort of, I mean, I suppose it's a question of service to your country, even though Biffy's sort of grown up in Odessa, but he obviously is still very much believes in empire in Britain, etc.
Yeah, I think he he was clearly patriotic. I think he sort of slightly fell into this by accident. He was obviously the right sort of person because he took to it like a duck to water.
Yeah.
But he was hired as an interpreter. That's quite clear. And that's how it started. But he then either said or it just provided evidence that he could do more. And he gathered the most extraordinary high-grade intelligence on the Bolsheviks. And most of his reports are preserved in the National Archive in Kew, and quite a lot of them found their way to the head of naval intelligence and then probably across departments to the Secret Intelligence Service. And quite a few of them are endorsed by the Director of Naval Intelligence saying, please pass on my congratulations to Mr. Dunderdale, because he was a civilian, really, for a very interesting, sound, important report. And he then fell into this business of gathering intelligence very quickly, and he became sort of one of their star intelligence officers in the Crimean region.
Was he able to sort of, because obviously the civil war between the Bolsheviks and the White Russians fails. That's why we have so many sort of White Russians, it's a caricature of sort of White Russian nobility sitting in cafes in Paris through the late teens, early 20s. But how did he get out of the Crimea, or did he stay in the region, or was he then, was his skills transferred back to the UK and he was sort of our man in Europe, stroke the Eastern Europe?
He enhanced his reputation by quelling a Bolshevik mutiny on a Russian imperial ship, single-handed, for which he was awarded the MBE. So by the time he was 21,
yes,
he had an MBE, an operational MBE, which is it's a good thing to have, 2 mentions in dispatches, 2 Russian decorations, and he'd carved out this reputation for himself of being a capable intelligence officer. So he came back to England to receive his MBE, at an investiture at Buckingham Palace, at which point Admiral Mansfield Cumming, head of the Secret Intelligence Service, collared him and said, I think you better come and work for us. So in 1921, Russian Civil War was over, we were out. He was posted to Constantinople, which made a lot of sense because a lot of the White Russian community had fled to Constantinople. And as you said, Paris, and we perhaps get to Paris later because that was his next port of call. But he started his sort of formal work for the intelligence service, Secret Intelligence Service, in Constantinople, working against the Bolsheviks, and increasingly also working to understand Turkish nationalism. Kemal Atatürk was, the Sultan was sort of deposed, really, but in fact he fled on a British warship. Biffy was involved in all that, and a very amusing story. He had helped pay off the Sultan's harem with gold sovereigns.
Oh, terrible job. Awful. Yeah,
exactly. So his career, as well as becoming more professional, was becoming a little bit more exotic, and he stayed in Constantinople doing very interesting things till 1926.
That must have been fascinating with the end of the Ottoman Empire. As you say, there's the Young Turks coming through. It is that melting pot. It's the old name, of course, Constantinople. It's been going since it was the capital of the Holy Roman Empire, for goodness sake, centuries before. And it really is in a list of exotic sort of intelligence stroke spy locations. It's right up there with sort of between wars, I don't know, Tangier or Cairo, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and Vienna. I mean, all those places where cultures meet, and you've got a refugee population or displaced population like Constantinople. But again, Constantinople's like Odessa. It was a sort of melting pot.
Yeah.
Geographically important, culturally and religiously significant because of the Muslims and the West. So he was in his element.
What sort of work is he doing there? Presumably the big threat then is Bolshevism and the instability that, because obviously the thing with that particular set of ideology is you wish to export it to the rest of the world, so it becomes this utopian paradise, quote unquote. So is he running sort of counterintelligence? Is he running covert operations? I mean, or is it just is it a see and send back sort of posting?
No, he did the full spectrum of intelligence work in Constantinople. His first and foremost thing was penetrating the Bolsheviks and gathering intelligence on their intent. And as you said, they wanted to spread the word. But he was increasingly, or the British government and other Western governments were not really understanding what Kemal Ataturk was all about. And they initially thought the Bolsheviks were going to exploit Turkish nationalism. In fact, Ataturk was way ahead of the game. He was prepared to use the Russians, use the Bolsheviks, but wasn't going to let them interfere with his aspirations for Turkey. So Biffy, intelligence work, increasingly against two targets, but he also ran covert operations in the Transcaucasus, not very successfully, actually, because there wasn't the effort to do it, but they would run boats full of weapons to the sort of remnants of the White Russians in Georgia and places like that. But it petered out because it wasn't really being very successful.
When does the move to Paris take place then? Because I mentioned it and you said, he was there as well. So when did he get himself into, and what period of time is he in Paris?
1926. Right. So age 26, he gets promoted sort of way beyond his experience, really, which proves how capable he was. He was spotted as clearly very capable of penetrating or being involved with the White Russians and spotting the Bolsheviks. And in 1926, the head of the Secret Intelligence Service wanted to establish another station in Paris, SIS station, in order to continue the work, because quite a lot of the White Russian emigre community had gone through Constantinople, and when the Turkish nationalists took power, they went to Paris. Not all of them, but a lot of them did. Yeah. So there was this huge White Russian community in Paris. And again, Biffy was targeting them, but his primary role was to get alongside the French intelligence service, the Deuxième Bureau, and solidify cooperation. Quite a smart move on SIS's part, because the French were very well funded and very well equipped to carry out intelligence and counterintelligence work. And the British government wanted to benefit from it. Biffy, of course, spoke French, spoke Russian, and he was an ideal choice. And he went to Paris in 1926. He was independently wealthy, so he took a decision, rather than trying to live a sort of covert life with a cover story, which he'd have to maintain all the time, and probably it would be seen through. He said, well, I mean, his cover was, I'm a very rich young man, and I work at the British Embassy. That's my day job, and I have lots of fun outside of that. And of course it worked, and it gave him access to all sorts of people. And the French service loved him, and it was a great working relationship.
I suppose, yeah, because there are independently wealthy young men sort of, prattling around Europe, and Paris is a place to be. It's rather than sitting on some border post, making up that you're just a journalist stringing for the Daily Telegraph or whatever. So it must work well. He was also. He loved life. I mean, this isn't a grey man, is it? It's not. He's not a grey man.
He's definitely not a grey man. He made no secret of the fact that he liked the high life. He used his money to enjoy himself. He bought a very smart motor yacht, which he kept on the River Seine. He was always seen in the best restaurants, nightclubs, and bear in mind, Paris at this time was going through a sort of absolute explosion of culture and the arts and all sorts of things. And a lot of people moved there. A lot of Americans moved there. And it was a very vibrant place. And of course, with his lifestyle and mixing in those circles, he got to meet everybody and he could get alongside anybody and either use them for his intelligence purposes or recruit them directly.
Yeah. I was going to say, because he's now operating as a spy master, and he is he's running the network of little spiders, and he's at the center of the web.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly that.
When does the focus? Sorry.
No, the French loved him.
Yeah.
I mean, that relationship, the purpose of going there to get alongside the French worked. And he became very popular with them.
So he's in France during the 20s, and then the 30s he still remains there as sort of the storm clouds gather, and obviously, Leninism, or what you would call it, changes, and the focus has to be on Germany and what's going on there as well.
Exactly what happened. So Biffy stays in Paris till 1940. So, which is a long time to be in one post, but very sensibly they kept him there, and the threat was changing. Yes, the Bolsheviks, which by now were becoming the Soviets, were still a threat, still of interest. But increasingly, you had Hitler and Mussolini, you had the Spanish Civil War going on, and his intelligence targeting got much broader. And between him and the French, they realized that, Hitler was a problem. It was going to be a big problem. And they were ahead of the game because, that the sort of the governments of the day tended to ignore Hitler, or there was this sort of movement to avoid war because of the shadow of the First World War. Sure. But Biffy and his French mates realized this was a problem.
But the other problem is the French army, because it's one of the, France is one of the major industrial powers. It has one of the strongest armies on paper in the war. It's got the Maginot Line pointing towards. I mean, forget the fact that there's a crossing that the Germans have used in the Franco-Prussian War and the First World War, which they've neglected the very same route. But it is seen as inconceivable by the majority of the French people and the French government that the Germans would dare come that way against the formidable weight of the French army.
Yeah, I think it would be honest to say that the French general staff, the army, were in denial. They thought the Maginot Line was going to work. They'd forgotten that twice it had been breached in the same place. And they thought, well, we've invested all this time, effort, and money in these fortifications. Again, First World War mentality, hiding in trenches and bunkers, rather than being a maneuverist army. But luckily, the Deuxième Bureau I think it would be too strong to say, they were aware that this was a bit of a sham, but they got it, and between them and Biffy, they wanted to engage with people like the Poles who were working on decryption. And we can get into the whole Enigma thing in a minute, because it's pretty central to one of the things Biffy did. But they were exasperated. The intelligence services were exasperated by the lack of determination to get to grips with intercept and decoding and breaking German codes. It was just sort of ignored. Sorry, it's all too difficult. Except for the embryonic Bletchley Park, which was, by the late 30s, was functioning. But it wasn't getting the focus that it later demanded and was important.
So, as we know, it's the Blitzkrieg. Poland falls very quickly. Then France falls ridiculously quickly after that as well. The French army disintegrates, demoralized, etc. Vichy France is set up. So where does Biffy go? And Enigma, and what's his role in fledgling Bletchley and Enigma?
Okay, so before the German invasion of the Low Countries in France, Biffy and the French had quietly sort of done their own thing and got alongside the Poles, went to Warsaw, and there was a meeting at which some of the people from Bletchley Park came over, because, again, they suddenly woke up to the fact that this was really important. So they went to the Poles, and the Poles said, look, we've made copies of this thing called Enigma. We know how it works, and we've cracked it. I mean, the Germans kept, it was a classic race to keep something encrypted as somebody else broke it, went on and on. But it ended up with the Poles giving the French and the British a copy each of their Enigma machine. And 16 days before the outbreak of war, so in August 39, Biffy brought one of those machines to London on the Golden Arrow train.
Right.
And handed it over at Victoria Station to Stuart Menzies, who was the head of the Secret Intelligence Service, who immediately gave it to the people from Bletchley, and they took it away. And that's how the work at Bletchley had started, but this really was a great leap forward. So by the beginning of the war, we had a really good handle on Enigma. But of course, we then had to race to keep up with the Germans, who kept adding encryption levels to it.
Indeed.
And then Biffy gets out. He has to leave.
Yeah, sure.
They all, French army collapses, Dunkirk's going on. The station is told to evacuate, which they do overland, and they go down to Arcachon near Bordeaux, and off they go in a boat, in a ship. Biffy, suddenly people realize Biffy knew the Enigma secret, and he was told, you cannot be captured. And this is Stuart Menzies saying, I'm sending an aeroplane to get you specifically. You are coming out today.
Right.
He did, and he got back to London. But he had already laid the groundwork in the collapsing days of the French defeat, and stayed in touch with his friends, particularly Gustave Bertrand, who was the closest member of the Deuxième Bureau to him. And what they'd agreed that the writing was on the wall. The French had to go to Vichy. The intelligence service were told, you will go to Vichy and you will be the French Vichy French intelligence service. What the Vichy regime didn't know is that Bertrand and the intelligence service had said to Biffy, listen, don't worry about this. We're on your side. Get us a radio and we'll be in communications. So quite early on in 1940, we're here stuck in England expecting a German invasion. Biffy flies to Lisbon and gets a radio to the Vichy intelligence service, and then everybody's back in the game. And of course, that was complicated by the fact that General de Gaulle turned up in London.
That was about to say that, because the French politicians or the French generals or the Free French get involved, and they set up, when they set up SOE, is it SOEF or whatever? But the French SOE or the SIS French. I mean, they cause all sorts of interesting scenarios, shall we say?
Well, it was a problem. So the ingredients in the melting pot were the Secret Intelligence Service, which was, was our intelligence service, and then Churchill created SOE to go, on the offensive because we had nothing else. We were right on our uppers, and that caused that caused friction in the intelligence world in London. But then de Gaulle appears and says, I'm France, and expects to be completely part of the Allied war effort, including intelligence sharing. So SIS, being a very clever organization, thought, how the hell are we going to deal with this? We've got our own problems with SOE. We'll sort that out ourselves. So we'll create two French sections, one under Kenneth Cohen, who ostensibly worked with de Gaulle and the Free French and his embryonic intelligence service, and Biffy, who will continue to run his own networks in France because he's been there for best part of 14 years. Yeah. And the very secret thing that we're in cahoots with the people in Vichy, or they're in cahoots with us, and that had to be kept from de Gaulle. Yeah, because
the actual French Secret Service de Gaulle set up, there were double agents and WhatsApp agents and people double crossing each other, and the incredibly brave agents working under the noses of the Nazis would have been exposed within minutes, I think.
Yeah, and there was another layer of complication. The Poles, the Free Polish Intelligence Service, had huge networks across Europe, and Biffy was given responsibility for those as well. and everybody was doing a good job, except probably the Free French intelligence service, and it was a real problem. And in the end, about 1942, it got sorted out. Everybody's heads were banged together, and they came up with a collective plan as to how to prepare agents and intelligence work prior to the D-Day landings. So eventually sorted out. But the secret of Biffy's liaison with the Vichy intelligence service and the fact they were providing us with lots of intelligence was kept secret right to the end of the war. And
yes.
It was a bit of a surprise to General de Gaulle when he went back to France.
Well, lots of things were a surprise to General de Gaulle when he went back to France, but he just, there were quite a few things that he did to not make himself entirely popular to those around him. I've only got 2 minutes left, unfortunately, Tim, because I could talk, as you can know, we could talk to this till about probably next Tuesday, but this is a person that we haven't known that much about until now. So when did he cross your radar? And we've got 2 minutes. And how important is it for us to know about Biffy?
Okay, he came across my radar when I was writing another book because it was about dropping agents in France using motor gunboats. And he was one of the clients. He sent the agents, get on the boat, go. And I thought, who is this fat man? You couldn't resist the name, Wilfred Biffy Dunderdale. And I did a bit of investigation thinking that he would be written about, hundreds of books on intelligence in World War II, nothing.
Right.
And whilst he was a sort of larger-than-life character, he was very, very secretive. He kept his sort of pledge under what's now the Official Secrets Act absolutely meticulously until he died. And I just don't know why nobody's latched onto him before, but it was, irresistible. So I wrote the book.
What do you hope that people will discover about Biffy or about the fascinating life in general? What do you hope that people learn about?
Well, I think if you like intelligence stuff, and of course he was very friendly with Ian Fleming, and he is part of the ingredients of the character of James Bond. He's not Bond, he's not the role model. But I think people, like adventure stories, great. People like espionage books, intelligence books, but it is also a sort of snapshot of world history, if you like, running from the Russian Revolution all the way through to when Biffy died the year that Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait.
Oh.
So that gives you a sort of historical perspective.
The book is called A Suspicion of Spies. It's by Tim Spicer. It's available to order from our own virtual bookstore. Do you do the online thing? Tim, can we find you on the internet?
You can find me on, I'm not very good at all this, but Instagram, Tim Spicer author, and Facebook the same. And there's all sorts of stuff of backstories of the book and things.
The book is called A Suspicion of Spies. Tim Spicer, thank you so much for your time today.